Hello and good evening. My name is Madison Beitler, a senior communication studies major at the University of Mount Union. I've spent the last 2 academic semesters studying speech and academic freedom on college campuses, and tonight I'm going to share with you what I have learned. On September 27, 2017, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions addressed Georgetown Law and promised, starting today, the Department of Justice will do its part in this struggle. We will enforce federal law, defend free speech, and protect students' free expression from whatever end of the political spectrum it may come. This statement came in response to many arrests of students on college campuses for expressing what they believed to be their freedom of speech. A group of students in Battle Creek, Michigan passed out constitutions on the side of a busy hallway and asked passerbys whether they enjoyed freedom or believed in liberty. The authorities were called, and when the students refused to give up their posts, they were arrested and jailed. These situations have led to many policies on speech, including speech codes. At Boise State University, the Student Code of Conduct prohibits, quote, conduct that a reasonable person would find offensive. At Clemson University in South Carolina, they ban action or speech that lead to, quote, offensive educational, work, or living environments. It's hard to determine how to follow these codes when there's no set definition for offensive or reasonable. Jeff Sessions also points out the phenomenon of free speech zones that we've seen popping up on college campuses. In some cases, the free speech zones may be the size of just a few college dorms. For example, at Pierce College, a student was handing out U.S. constitutions printed in Spanish. He was prohibited from doing so on the college campus anywhere except for the free speech zone, which was only 616 square feet. Joyce Lee Malcolm, a professor at George Mason University, writes in her essay, Building a Culture of Expression on the American College Campus, many speech codes are vague and ambiguous. They outlaw harassment without actually defining what harassment is. In a study by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, they found out of the 450 colleges and universities in the U.S., only 27 were free from speech policies that threaten free speech on campuses. 92.4% of schools had in their Student Code of Conduct a policy that restricted free speech or punished protected speech. Joyce Lee Malcolm also touches on safe spaces and free speech zones, saying that they are simply a place of prejudice for those with the opposing ideologies of the majority group to reside. Safe spaces are basically the opposite of free speech zones. They are a place for people to hide away, whether there's an event on campus, for them to retreat or seek support if they disagree with the ideology of the event being held. There can be much discussion to be made on whether or not speech codes, safe spaces, and free speech zones are constitutional and allowed under the First Amendment. One may argue that there are undoubtedly times where a university must step in, especially when things become violent. The ACTA, American Council of Trustees and Alumni, did a report on campus free speech, academic freedom, and the problem of the BDS movement. It gave many examples of speakers being invited to campuses for commencement speeches, debates, and presentations. However, many times these speakers were later disinvited. One example was at the University of Minnesota in 2005. The student group SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, shouted over a speaker invited to do a lecture on the philosophy of law. The speaker was a professor from a Hebrew university where he taught Jewish philosophy. The university participated in what many call the heckler's veto. I've come up with this phrase many times in my research, and basically it means that the protesters get what they desire because the university removes the speaker instead of the protesters. Many times the university will justify their decision by protecting the speaker. However, protesters follow through with these protests because they know that this is how they will end. Out of 350 disinvitations since 2000, FIRE reports that 50 happened alone in 2017. Many times these speakers are not disinvited for moral reasons, but because of political ideologies or personal characteristics. When looking at political ideologies, what is safe to be shared on college campuses? Should there be a restriction for politically motivated content? There's a commonly held idea that educators should remain unbiased and fair, especially when presenting to impressionable minds. However, faculty at universities are human too, and academic freedom allows them to sway one way or the other. The ACTA interviewed 658 undergraduate students in 2004 from the top 25 universities in the country. 47% of students witnessed their professors speaking negatively about conservatives. 14% witnessed their professors speaking negatively about liberals, and 74% said their professors speak positively about liberals. A 2016 Gallup poll revealed that 27% of students feel that their colleges should, quote, restrict speech expressing political views that may upset or offend members of certain groups. Research like this is what led me to do my research on the University of Mount Union's campus. I began to ask myself questions like, where do universities draw the line between discriminatory speech but allowing for freedom of speech? Between allowing academic freedom but ensuring safety in the classroom? My research questions were as follows. Have students, faculty, and/or staff experienced offensive language on campus as a victim or as a witness? Do students, faculty, and staff feel that classroom content that could be considered offensive is needed or inappropriate? And are students, faculty, and staff familiar with the speech policies on campus, and if so, do they agree with them? My hypotheses were that if the sample is diverse, then the amount of offensive speech will be higher. If students, faculty, and staff have been victim or witnesses, they will have more recommendations for how to fix the problem on their campus. I conducted a 24-question survey that took approximately 5 to 10 minutes to complete. It was open for 7 days, and participants received the survey via email, text, or social media post with the same general recruitment message. Participants were asked to leave their email or to contact myself if they were interested in a follow-up interview. I had 35 responses to my survey, and I conducted 2 interviews. 31 responses were students, 2 were faculty, and 2 were staff. I'll focus my results on the students as the faculty and staff participants were not enough to serve any conclusions. The students ranged in academic year. 80% were white and 20% were from racial minorities. 100% were cisgender, 83% were heterosexual, the other 17% were other. 69% were Christian, 3% were Jewish, and 29% were other or non-religious. My study defined offensive language as hurtful, derogatory, or discriminatory actions, words, and/or phrases made by one person to another. When students were asked if they had been affected by offensive language within their academic classrooms, 40% said never, 29% said rarely, 26% said sometimes, and 6% said very often. The offensive comments were made by mostly students, however 20% were made by faculty and staff. When asked whether or not students had witnessed offensive language anywhere on their campus, 23% said never, 30% rarely, 31% sometimes, and 9% very often. Again, these statements were mostly made by students, however 7% were made by faculty and staff. The students were then asked if they'd ever used offensive language on their campus, and 14% admitted to using offensive language intentionally. 46% admitted to using offensive language unintentionally. When asked whether or not offensive language was a problem on their campus, 43% say that there is a slight problem with offensive language. 23% say there's a moderate problem, and 6% say it's very much a problem. I then asked the students about course content. 74% said that teaching uncomfortable content is necessary in some cases. 14% said only if no one in the room will be offended by the content being taught, and 6% said that it should be avoided at all costs. When gauging whether or not students were familiar with the speech policies on campus, 43% claimed they were unfamiliar with the speech codes, and out of those that were familiar, less than 50% agreed, and the majority were neutral. For my interviews, I interviewed a senior engineering major with plans to attend law school. He claims that most offensive incidents are rare, and a lot of times people are seeking attention through being offended, maybe due to social media influence. This causes everything to be unsafe, and anything could be considered controversial. He says that classrooms should be spaces for varying perspectives and diversity in thought, and that spirit is being ruined. The second interview was with the sophomore HR management major, and she says that training about words and phrases to use and not to use would be very beneficial. She says that diversity training could be integrated into the integrative core courses that Mount Union students take in their first 2 years on campus. As my data has been very similar to the national data, I feel the topic of speech and academic freedom is one of major importance. This is an area of study that affects many. Of course, students, faculty, and staff of these universities and colleges, but also their friends and family, people that believe in higher education, those involved in law and legalities, and many, many others. As a country that values education, we should value the environment of our learning and institutions. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have found a new topic of interest.